We got the breaking news that happens on 105 through the Fan that Brian Schottenheimer is going to be your Dallas Cowboys next head coach. He's been your OC for the last couple years. He gets the promotion or brought backness, whatever you want to call it. Let's figure out the exact way of how everything was laid out. Let's go out to the Dean and Leeson hotline of the morning show. Love of the Star, no more. Below the belt, Bobby Belt. Bobby, how are you taking this news?
Bobby.
I pretty much expected. I think we spent pretty much the last 3 days thinking this is kind of the direction that it was heading. And Brian Schottenheimer is a guy who I think had a lot of player support and had a lot of, front office support. And ultimately that's how this happened. They're not concerned about public opinion. They're not concerned about anything else other than the kind of feedback they were getting from their players and the people within their front office. And all of those people really like Brian Schottenheimer, and that is why Brian Schottenheimer is now the 10th head coach in Cowboys history.
Well, I don't think this will be a surprise because the fan support has not been great. We opened the phone lines to the Tolos. They were disappointed. I'm looking at the Franklin text line right now. I don't think I've seen one person with any positivity. We asked Nick Harris to give us a positive spin. Any positivity out of this hire? Could you see this going right?
Yeah, so I'm already arguing with people on Twitter about this. I don't know if this is a good hire. I don't know if this is a bad hire. Their process, the hiring process they went through seems flawed and a little rushed. Mm-hmm. So that alone is not good. Do I know with certainty that this is a good hire? No. But do I have anything that tells me, like, with certainty Brian Schottenheimer is going to be a failure as a head coach? I don't have that either.
Right.
And so, look, I have questions about him as a play caller. I have questions about what kind of talent they have and how close they are. But if you're asking me, like, okay, well, what does Brian Schottenheimer do well? What would you be excited about? Well, Brian Schottenheimer is an effective communicator. Brian Schottenheimer is a guy who gets high leadership marks. Brian Schottenheimer is a guy who I don't think this team's ever going to be unprepared. I don't know that they're going to have schematic advantages over people. Are they going to, play the Bears next year and work over Ben Johnson? I don't know. Probably not. Are they going to be more talented than the other teams in the NFC? Probably not. But, I don't think we're going to see a game like that Packers playoff game last year. I don't think you're just going to see all 53 players show up and not be prepared to play a massive football game. And that's a big check in Schottenheimer's favor. And I think that's something that a lot of people did ask for. They wanted a CEO. They wanted a motivator. They wanted a culture builder. Those are the things that are in Schottenheimer's favor. Now, does that add up to him being a good coach? No. That doesn't automatically make him a good coach. But I certainly don't think just because you dislike the process, and it was a bad process, I agree, just because you dislike the process and no one was out there clamoring to hire, Brian Schottenheimer or anything else, I don't think that means it's a slam dunk bad hire either. John Harbaugh was hired as a special teams coach away from the Eagles to the Ravens, and there were a lot of people who gagged at that hire at the time and said it was just a joke of a hire. And John Harbaugh was hired 20 years ago, has won a Super Bowl, and maintains one of the most consistent football teams in the NFL. It's unlikely Brian Schottenheimer is going to do that just because those sort of results are always unlikely. But again, I'm not going to just say definitively either way what it is. I will say that I don't think the process was the best. I don't know why you don't go interview Cliff Kingsbury. I don't know why you don't spend more time with Kellen Moore or widen the scope of things. That is a flawed process that I don't agree with. But the actual merits of can he lead this football team, there's a lot of evidence that says he can, and the questions for me seem to be a lot more schematic.
Hold on, Bobby.
Bobby, we've got even more breaking news, and I'm glad we got you on the phone for this. Breaking news on 105 Through the Fan is presented by BetQL. Smarter bets start with BetQL. Download the BetQL app or visit BetQL.com today. Bobby Belt, from our boy Wolchuk, from our boys Ed Warder, the Cowboys have hired Matt Eberflus as their defensive coordinator. Now the first member of Brian Schottenheimer's staff. More news. Bobby,
thoughts.
Good hire?
Thoughts.
Bad hire?
Your thoughts? He's back to the Cowboys. Remember, he was the linebackers coach back in the day.
He was, he was also there. I think he had the title of passing game coordinator or something like that too at one point. Early on in this process, I had said I thought Eberflus was going to be the defensive coordinator. Then I was kind of starting to trend towards being dissuaded of that, and then that started circling back around yesterday. I'm just like, okay, this is starting to look more likely. It seemed to make sense at the beginning of the hiring process, even before you talk to anybody. It's just like, okay, he was supposed to be the heir apparent to Rod Marinelli. Rod Marinelli stuck around longer than they anticipated. And Matt Eberflus was a little frustrated back in the day that he wasn't allowed to go join Kyle Shanahan's staff when he was offered a job, and he was a little upset that they didn't do that. So when his contract ran out, he said, all right, probably time for a fresh start. And I mean, gosh, that was 7 years ago now.
Yeah, went to the Colts.
People within this building are definitely familiar with him and liked him, and at one point wanted him to be their next defensive coordinator. I would say that, the Schottenheimer hiring is going to get killed a lot more than the Eberflus one is. There's at least a lot more questions to me about culture and player interactions with Eberflus based on some of the stuff we heard coming out of Chicago at the end. Now, is that one-sided, and does that tilt a certain way? I mean, those are all things you can ask, but I think at least there's more things we need to find out in that respect. But Matt Eberflus, like I said, that was a guy who was a really strong coach here, was at one time considered one of the hotter defensive coordinator names in the NFL, and things kind of fell apart there in Chicago. It's not a bad jumpstart project. The Cowboys have shown themselves that they like hiring former head coaches as their defensive coordinators. When you look at Rod Marinelli, Dan Quinn, Mike Nolan, Mike Zimmer, now Matt Eberflus, that's the well they go dip into, is they have turned their defensive coordinator position into a coaching rehab spot. And Matt Eberflus has been in need of that since things went down in Chicago. But he's definitely, during his time here in Dallas, it was hard to find anybody who would say a bad thing about him. They all really liked him, and he did a really, really good job here. It's just, I think there's some questions now coming out of Chicago.
Okay, I know no one knows for a fact, but let me get your guesses. Whose fingerprints are on these hirings? Is this Steven's fingerprints or Jerry's, or is this a joint venture?
I think on Schottenheimer?
On
or
both. On as they put this staff together. Because I don't think Schottenheimer is picking all of them.
No, I don't either, but also I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. I don't think there's a single job in the NFL that when you get hired as head coach, that you're allowed to pick every single staff member. Every single NFL team makes you carry over a couple assistants. And so to me, that's not uncommon. I think that Schottenheimer, my understanding is there is some familiarity there with Eberflus, and so I don't think that he would be opposed to that sort of thing. And I'm sure there are plenty of people within the building who that would be more a front office or personnel department type of thing with the Eberflus thing. On Schottenheimer, I think Jerry's on board. I think he wanted to evaluate a couple different things, but I think the Schottenheimer thing is more about Stephen Jones and Dak Prescott and players and other people like that providing this feedback that they wanted Schottenheimer. I think whenever we hear from Dak Prescott eventually, whenever he puts a statement out there, you're going to hear him talking, really positively about this hire, and really glowingly about this hire, because I think this is, I believe, and we'll let Dak talk about this, but I believe this is who Dak probably wanted, was Schottenheimer.
Yeah, Bobby, we had you on the Fan After Dark, me and Fred, I want to say a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, and we're talking about the staff and what guys we thought might be brought back, the likes of Al Harris, Solari. Obviously, we talked about Brian Schottenheimer. Me and Fred.
Oh, yeah, I remember this sarcastic question Fred asked.
Yeah, he was like, what does Brian Schottenheimer do? You let him know that he's the liaison. He's kind of the middle point between the head coach and the quarterback in the offense. Do you think the entire team is going to be taking this seriously? Because the fans definitely aren't. Obviously, it's a hire that comes out of nowhere unless you're connected to the building when you look at it from a 1,000-foot view. Just how is the team going to be receptive to this hire? You kind of referenced there. I told you and Fred this 6 weeks ago or whatever it was.
Schottenheimer got a ton of high marks for when they switched over offenses, and there was a lot of tension initially between McCarthy and the offensive players. Schottenheimer received a ton of high marks, I think, from people within the organization for being the guy who could effectively bridge their gap. He could take Mike's concepts and communicate them in a way to the players that was something they felt better about. He would take the players' concerns and he would then lobby and communicate that to McCarthy. And so I think he is responsible for a lot of the trust being built between McCarthy and the offense by the end. I think Schottenheimer deserves a lot of that credit for that, and I think the Cowboys view him as deserving a lot of that credit. So again, if you're talking about someone who's going to build a culture and be a leader to things like that, over the last 2 years, we've seen him do it on that front, and that's probably one of the things that makes them feel like this is somebody who can be a consensus builder and lead people. I will say this. I think by the end of things, and I think Brian Schottenheimer and Mike McCarthy, they like each other and respect each other and have been friends and different things like that. I don't think Brian Schottenheimer agreed 100% of the way with Mike McCarthy's offensive philosophy. I think he probably wanted to look at some other things that were more common around the league and becoming trends around the league that, Mike McCarthy was not as willing to dive into. And so I do think that if he's going to call plays here, which is my expectation, but if Brian Schottenheimer is going to call plays here, I would not be surprised if when we get to the end of the first season, we look at the trends, and whether good or bad, we look at the way he called the offense and we say, well, that's different than what we've seen throughout his career. Because I think Schottenheimer kind of evolved on some things, and by the end of it, I don't know that he and McCarthy saw things completely the same way schematically.
That leads to the final question we got for you before you get out of here. McCarthy's the one that brought him to the Dallas Cowboys because of his relationship with his dad. He was on his dad's coaching staff, and he said he's been knowing Brian since he was like a little kid. How awkward is it that he follows McCarthy and McCarthy wasn't renewed? How awkward is that?
Look, I mean,
or not?
Yeah, I obviously I can't speak to their personal relationship, but I mean, just from our perspective, I think from a human level, yeah, there's probably some awkwardness there because I think they probably had some disagreements, over time, even though I think they respect each other. And like I said, Schottenheimer got a lot of credit for bridging a gap there. I think that there still were some disagreements along the way. And then when things fall apart with his deal and Schottenheimer's quickly held up as the shining example, yeah, I'm sure it's a little odd. The first time they see each other, it might be a little awkward. But in terms of if things have gotten ugly between them or anything else, I don't know about that. I just think, yeah, it's probably natural. Like, oh, this is a little odd. It's you're bumping into the guy you replaced. It's like when I'm in the press box at AT&T Stadium and I see Fish. I'm like, oh, hey, what's up, buddy?
Bobby, I got to ask. We don't got it. We have a DC name in Eberflus. We got the head coach in Schottenheimer. Any lead? Any speculation on who the OC could be? Does it even matter because we know Schottenheimer will be calling plays?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see which guys get retained.
Right.
So I don't know.
About.
Look, I know a lot of people have wanted to prop up Scott Tolzien for a while, the quarterbacks coach. Does Tolzien get it, or is Schottenheimer doubling up as offensive coordinator and head coach, or does he just find somebody to be an offensive coordinator in title only, but ultimately this is Schottenheimer calling the plays? I don't know.
Well, he's been an OC for like 13 years, so he knows guys around the league.
Plenty of liaisons.
Yeah, and I mean he's wanted to call plays ever since he left Seattle.
Yeah.
I mean that was his last big play calling experience. I mean I think he may have called plays in Jacksonville in 21 or 20 whenever Trevor Lawrence was a rookie. But I mean if you look at as much as the let Russ cook and why are you guys holding him back and why aren't you letting him tap into as much as he can, Russell Wilson's 3 most successful years were under Schottenheimer.
Yep.
Now that doesn't mean anything. Again, I don't want people to melt down and saying, oh, he's trying to sell this. Not trying to sell anything. I'm just looking at this objectively. Here are the numbers. Here's the reality. Here are the questions about Schottenheimer. Here are the things that he objectively gets a lot of high marks for. They're not just hiring somebody who literally has no positive qualities towards being a head coach. There are things about Schottenheimer that you need to objectively and reasonably look at and say, yeah, these are things that are good and are good and work in his favor, but there is a lot of unknown, and those things could burn them, and you don't know. I don't think it's that this is definitely a bad hire. It's that you don't know what kind of a hire this is. And that's frustrating because people didn't want a don't know.
Right.
They wanted a home run. They wanted a legend. They wanted a Belichick. They wanted they wanted the big fish. I can't blame them. I think that there were probably better options out there to go with. But again, I can't say with certainty that this is going to be a bad hire. Can't say with certainty it's going to be a good hire either. But
the process was wicked, though. It was like, you got to be kidding.
There are legitimate pros and cons on both sides to state about Brian Schottenheimer's candidacy. But at the end of the day, you don't know. And that's the thing that I think is most frustrating to fans is you went and got something that's really unknown.
Bobby, we're up against it. I have to ask, though, do you think the timing of this being buried at a Friday night going into the weekend, does this tell you anything about how
Sean was saying
the thinking of how this hire went down?
Yeah.
You and Sean agree?
Come on. When have the Cowboys really announced anything at 9 o'clock at night on a Friday?
Think about it.
If it's past 4 p.m., we're generally not getting an announcement from the Cowboys till 8 the next morning. So I would just say at the very least, I don't know that it says anything other than just maybe they knew this may not be received in the best sort of way. But I definitely thought that they would push something to next week and move it around the Senior Bowl.
Man.
But yeah, this is that standard Friday news dump, you know?
Well, I'm glad they did it while me and CA were on the air, Fan After Dark. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy day, Bobby, and giving us some insight into this coaching hire and new DC as well. Any parting words before you get out of here?
Yeah, I'm going to go finish drinking now, boys. I love you all.